The late 1960s saw Miles embark on yet another musical direction as he incorporated the musical and sociological style of the rock musicians of the era, leading the way into what became known as jazz rock fusion. The transition took place over the course of 4 albums recorded between January of 1968 and August of 1969. Released in July of 1968, Miles in the Sky featured his quintet with the addition of George Benson on guitar on one track. Also, Herbie Hancock and Ron Carter played electric piano and bass on another. It seems likely that Herbie was intrigued from the start by the sonic possibilities of electric instruments considering his future direction. Ron probably only played it under duress from Miles, given that he was the only member of the group who didn't fully embrace jazz rock fusion in the next decade, and he ultimately played acoustic bass almost exclusively for most of his career. Some of this album sounds similar to what the quintet had been playing up to that point, but at other times, the rock influence is very evident in Tony Williams' grooves. Feet of Kilimanjaro was recorded in 2 separate sessions in June and September of 1968. The original quintet is featured on 3 of the tunes, with Herbie and Ron playing electric piano and bass. On the other 2 tunes, Chick Corea plays electric and acoustic piano, and Dave Holland plays acoustic bass. This was Ron Carter's last album with the quintet. The woman on the cover is singer Betty Mabry, who became Betty Davis when she married Miles in 1968. The marriage only lasted a year, but she was influential in introducing Miles to the rock music culture and musicians like Jimi Hendrix and Sly Stone. Gil Evans collaborated as a composer and arranger on the album, but he wasn't credited, and in fact Miles had a habit of taking credit for the work of others on his albums. Gil's composition Mademoiselle Mabry is based on Jimi Hendrix's The Wind Cried Mary. A proposed collaboration between Gil and Hendrix never happened because of Jimmy's untimely death in 1970 at the age of 27, which is unbelievable when you consider his impact. While the previous two albums were heading in the direction, the album In a Silent Way was the true beginning of Miles' move towards rock-inspired electric music. The music was recorded in February of 1969 in a single 3-hour session. Wayne Shorter, Herbie Hancock, and Tony Williams were joined by Chick Corea on electric piano and also Joe Zawinul on electric piano, who composed the title track. Dave Holland played bass. The band also featured guitarist John McLaughlin, who had just arrived from England to play with Tony Williams' new trio, Lifetime. Here's John McLaughlin recalling the session.
Miles didn't like it. So he came up to me and he said, "Why don't you play it alone?" So I said, "You want the chords and the melody?" "Yes." I said, "Well, it will take me a minute just to get the piano chords and the guitar." "Is that a fact?" Just like putting me on the hot seat, you know. And I was already sweating. I mean, the sweat was running off my body. And he says, "Why don't you play it like you don't know how to play the guitar?" You know, and I heard murmuring, "Oh, this is a good one. This is really a good one." So I mean, what does he mean? You know, I don't know how to play the guitar. I have to play it like this. Is totally Zen koan. But in the meantime, he's got the red light is on. He's recording already. You know, and I don't believe it. I'm saying, just do it. Don't worry about it. Just go, you know. And then Wayne comes in, and then Miles comes in, and we end. So he says, "Play that back to you." Sarah was in the room. And I listened to that in a silent way, and it was unbelievably beautiful.
The three keyboardists on the album, along with John McLaughlin, would go on to become the most influential band leaders in the jazz rock era that followed. As he had in the past, Miles was able to see the future and choose the musicians who would bring it about. Miles and Joe Zawinul are credited as the composers of the music on In a Silent Way, but the producer Tio Macero had a major hand in it. He edited and rearranged musical segments, essentially creating a coherent flow from a series of jams. On this album, and especially the next, he elevated audio editing and processing to a creative art. He's been compared in that regard to what George Martin did for the Beatles. In a Silent Way was a definitive departure for Miles, one that essentially created a new genre. The author Phil Freeman, in his book Miles Runs the Voodoo Down, writes, "It wasn't exactly jazz, but it definitely wasn't rock." Reactions to the record were all over the map. Rock critics tended to celebrate the album as an elevation of the art form, but many jazz critics dismissed it as Miles simply selling out to commercial pressures. A lot of jazz fans, as they had in the past, wondered what had happened to the old Miles Davis. For Miles, though, it introduced him to a whole new audience, just as the orchestral albums with Gil Evans had done a decade before. Miles' next album, Bitches Brew, was recorded 6 months after In a Silent Way. Tio Macero said, "On In a Silent Way, the music was just starting to gel. On Bitches Brew, all the elements came together." The album was a watershed for Miles, his first gold record and the second of 9 Grammy Awards. All but one of Miles' Grammys came during the final decades of his career, which I suppose was more of an acknowledgement of his accumulated impact. Sketches of Spain won in 1960 for Best Composition, but that's really an award for Gil Evans. It's kind of amazing that Kind of Blue isn't on the list, considering the overall impact that album has had. Bitches Brew was equally impactful and reflective of the culture. The cover art reflected the surrealistic or psychedelic style of the rock era and the influence of the Black Power movement. It's an interesting coincidence that Bitches Brew was recorded at exactly the same time as the Woodstock Music Festival was taking place. As with most musical innovations, critical opinion was divided when it came to the music on Bitches Brew. Some felt that Miles had sold out to the commercial appeal of predominantly white rock musicians, but others recognized it for what it actually turned out to be, a signifier of a new direction in jazz, again spearheaded by Miles Davis, that would lead to the predominant genre in the 1970s, jazz rock fusion, and indeed for a lot of the music since then. Whereas In a Silent Way was recorded in 3 hours, Bitches Brew was recorded over 3 days, during which the tape recorder ran almost continuously. 15 musicians appeared on the album in total. Miles and Wayne Shorter were the only holdovers from the original quintet, with John McLaughlin on guitar, Benny Maupin on bass clarinet, 3 keyboardists, Joe Zawinul, Chick Corea, and Larry Young, 3 drummers, Jack DeJohnette, Lenny Wight, and Billy Cobham, 2 bass players, Dave Holland and Harvey Brooks, and 3 percussionists. The music was based on sketches that served as a basis for jams, which in turn would evolve more ideas as they went. Dave Holland said, "Miles always gave the minimum amount of instructions. His approach was that if he needed to tell someone what to do, he had the wrong musician." Jack DeJohnette described it as a stream of creative musical energy, saying, "We were stopping and starting all the time, maybe to write a sketch out and then go back to recording." The creative process was being documented on tape, with Miles directing the ensemble like a conductor. Most of it was just directed with a word here and a word there. Miles always went for the essence of things and being in the moment. And then he and Tio took all those moments and put them all together. Some of the edits surprised me, but overall they were seamless and they captured the feeling and the intensity of the music. Tio Macero's creative role in the music on Bitches Brew expanded on what he had done on In a Silent Way to the point that he was almost an equal partner. He cut and pasted segments together and added effects like tape delay, which was done on a machine that was built by the technicians at Columbia and which they called TO1. Macero described the process this way: "I had carte blanche to work with the material. I recorded everything right from beginning to end. In the editing room, I listened and said, this is a good little piece here, this matches with that, put this here, etc. Then I added in all the effects. I'd work on those tapes for 4 or 5 weeks to make them sound right. Then I'd send it to Miles and he'd say, 'That's fine,' or 'I thought you'd do that.' He never saw the work that had to be done on those tapes." In this segment from the 20-minute Pharaoh's Dance, you can hear tape delay on Miles' trumpet near the start, and if you listen closely, you'll hear examples of Tio Macero's edits. There are 17 of them in all on this track. He would take musical fragments as short as 1 second and repeat them multiple times. This is a live clip from the Isle of Wight Music Festival in 1970. This was the largest music festival of its time, attracting 600,000 to 700,000 people to an island in the English Channel. For comparison, the Woodstock Festival was estimated to be about 400,000. To give you an idea of the market that Miles was appealing to with this band, the other performers on the festival included Jimi Hendrix, Chicago, The Doors, Lighthouse, the Moody Blues, The Who, Joan Baez, Joni Mitchell, Jethro Tull, Sly and the Family Stone, 10 Years After, and Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Since this course ends just about the time that Bitches Brew was released, 1970, I won't go into detail about Miles' music over the last few decades of his life. But I don't want to leave the story unfinished. In the late 70s and early 80s, Miles withdrew as he went through a period of health problems and substance abuse. He regained his health with the help of Cicely Tyson, and they were married in 1981. They were a celebrity couple, as likely to appear in Vogue magazine as Downby, but the marriage was troubled like his previous relationships, and they divorced in 1988. In his final decades, Miles remained connected to and on the vanguard of popular music, drawing repertoire from artists like Michael Jackson and Cyndi Lauper. He didn't like the fact that record companies continued to market him as a jazz artist, as he felt that it disconnected him from the audience that he was trying to reach. He said, "The music was meant to be heard by young black people, but they pushed it on the jazz radio stations. Young black kids don't listen to those stations. They listen to R&B and some rock stations." Bill Evans seemed to miss that point, believing that Miles' direction was dictated by the record company. He said, "Big business and his record company have had a corrupting influence on Miles. It happens more and more these days that unqualified people try to tell musicians what good music is." There is tremendous irony in the fact that on Miles' final recording, 3 months before he died in 1991, he agreed to do something that was completely at odds with his entire career: play music he had recorded before with Gil Evans in the 1950s. Quincy Jones conducted the concert, and Wallace Roney was on hand to play some of the trumpet parts because Miles was so weak at that point. David Hajdu, in Entertainment Weekly, wrote, "This is not a career-summing work of miraculous late-life virtuosity. It's something even rarer, an almost unbearably honest musical expression, without apology or shame, of weakness, age, and pain." Miles Davis died on September 28, 1991. He was 65 years old. As I said at the outset of this series on Miles, his impact on the evolution of jazz is unmatched. The philosophy that drove the evolution is illuminated by quotes. "What I used to play was done at the right hour, the right day, but I have no feel for it anymore. A painting is music you can see. Music is a painting you can hear. Music is the framework around the silence. You have to know 400 notes that you can play, then pick 4. There are no wrong notes, only notes in the wrong places. It's the note you play afterwards that makes it right or wrong. Don't play what's there. Play what isn't there. If you don't know what to play nothing. Now, I always like to imagine that this is what Miles is whispering into Wayne's ear in this picture. When the band plays fast, you play slow. When the band plays slow, you play fast. And finally, it takes a long time to sound like yourself.